Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to this week's news roundup. Today I've got 4 stories for you, followed once again by 3 lighter stories from the world of Formula 1. But first up, Sebastian Vettel has said that there is a high chance his Ferrari future will be sorted out by the first race of the season, whenever that may be. Vettel is of course out of contract at the end of 2020 and there has been much speculation, not least on this channel, about whether or not he will continue to partner Charles Leclerc at the Scuderia next year. However, as we heard around testing, team boss Mattia Binotto has previously said that keeping hold of Vettel for 2021 is the team's first choice, and when asked about when his future is likely to be resolved, Vettel said the following. There is a high chance we'll have to make a decision before there will be the first race because at the moment, it looks like there will be no race before June or even July. The main priority at first was to ensure that we are all dealing with the situation in the right way. Therefore, everything was put on hold, and I can imagine that's the same everywhere else, and it was the same for us. It's not like a couple of days after Australia we said, right, now we'll talk. We will make progress. As well as the talk about his future, there has also been a lot of speculation flying around about how long any potential new deal would be, and even how much of a pay cut the German may have to take. And while Seb has understandably been clear that any conversations regarding his pay will be kept private, he also stressed that the overall deal would have to be something he and the team were comfortable with. But on the length of any new contract, he went on to add, in terms of duration, I don't know. Normally the contracts I've had in the past were all 3-year deals. I know I'm one of the more experienced drivers in Formula 1, but I'm not the oldest, and I don't think there's an age limit in this regard. Now, of course, until any deal is signed and announced, the rumour mill will continue to churn out just about every driver as a possible option for Ferrari, should Vettel choose to leave. And if we believe that speculation, Daniel Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz are said to be among the favourites to land that seat should Seb walk away. However, with Binotto stating that re-signing the German is the priority, and Vettel himself sounding more and more positive about sticking around, surely he will still be sat alongside Leclerc next year. I feel like this is a story that will just keep rumbling on over the next few weeks and months until somebody puts pen to paper. Moving on though, Formula 1 are reportedly drawing up plans to get the 2020 season underway in Austria, with 2 races at Silverstone on the cards, or at least that's according to BBC Sport. However, with the current restrictions in place around the world, it is likely that these events will be held behind closed doors. Although racing in 2020 may sound unlikely right now, Christian Horner appears to back up the prospect, saying that it would be feasible for the Austrian Grand Prix to take place without fans. Now, speaking to Sky F1, Horner said, "The Red Bull Ring is a ready-made facility, and it can be ready in a very short period of time to fit the FIA's criteria. The prospect of being able to run a race behind closed doors is absolutely feasible. I think there is going to be a staged route back into full-on Grand Prix, and there are certain circuits they are talking about, crowdless events potentially just focusing on TV, with limited numbers of people, limited operative staff there as a way to get the championship going. It is something that Austria and Red Bull are looking at, but of course they've got to work with the local authorities and governments, and so at the moment, it's just under discussion. The 2020 season starting in July is still the goal then, but as covered in a video last week, there is concern from the sport and teams about starting the season if it cannot continue and be completed. And that is something that, despite all the planning, is still a distinct possibility. Earlier this week, French and Belgian authorities banned mass gatherings until mid-July and the 31st of August respectively, which has obviously called into question the futures of both the French and the Belgian Grand Prix, with the organisers of the latter already halting ticket sales for the race that was due to take place across the weekend of August 28th to 30th. Despite all that uncertainty though, F1 bosses continue to make plans, with a report from race fans claiming that the season could start in Austria, followed by as many as 3 races across 4 weeks at Silverstone. It is also believed that the race at the Red Bull Ring would go ahead on its original date of July 5th, as Red Bull are apparently against a change of dates. However, that has changed again. Since these reports came out, Austria has apparently extended its ban on major events until August the 31st, casting serious doubts on the claims that the season could start at the Red Bull Ring. Ultimately, whatever F1 want to do, it will be the local governments and the restrictions in place that determine when and where F1 can go racing again. It could even come down to the definition, if you like, from country to country on what is considered a mass event or a mass gathering, but it will take hundreds, if not more than 1,000 people to make F1 happen at every event, and that is surely considered a mass gathering, and that's even without the fans. I mean, who really knows for sure? I suppose, as with everything right now, it's just a case of watch this space. So all of that took place during a meeting between teams and F1 on Thursday, but that wasn't the only thing to be discussed. Once again, the subject of reducing the cost cap was covered, and again, according to BBC Sport, the teams have described that meeting as positive and constructive, but no formal agreement was reached. The plan is apparently to introduce a cost cap of $145 million for 2021 and drop it further to $130 million for 2022. Now that would be a fair bit lower than the original $175 million figure, but still a way away from the alleged target of $100 million, which some of these smaller teams are pushing for. As of right now, it is expected that the budget cap will be set at $150 million for 2021, and that's because the teams reached an informal agreement a couple of weeks back, but of course that could still change as the talks continue. There were some other ideas put forward at the meeting as well, including a sliding scale of the amount of aerodynamic research allowed, with the more successful teams possibly having less compared to the struggling teams. Essentially, the team who wins the championship would be allowed to do the least amount of aero research, whereas the team who finished last would get to do the most. And Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull also wanted to tie this to the budget cap to allow them to spend more, but with less aerodynamic research being allowed. However, possibly somewhat unsurprisingly, that was reportedly rejected by F1 bosses who prefer the idea of a single cap for all the teams, with then the Aero research handicap system on top of that. Discussions between everyone involved do continue with no agreement yet reached, and it is expected that we are still several weeks away from any final agreement between teams and F1 on what changes will be put in place for the next few seasons. McLaren have reached an agreement with the FIA about how they will monitor the team switch from Renault to Mercedes power units next year. A few weeks ago, teams and F1 agreed to delay the new regulations, originally due to be introduced in 2021 of course, pushing them back to 2022, and then went even further by freezing the current chassis and other areas as they try to cut those costs. However, that led to speculation that McLaren may struggle to install Mercedes power units into their current chassis for 2021, which of course was originally built to house those Renault power units. Inevitably, there will have to be some changes to the McLaren chassis in order to make the switch possible, but the FIA will impose limits on just how much the team can change, and team boss Andreas Seidel confirmed an agreement for this had been reached, and went on to add that McLaren understand why chassis freezing was needed in the first place. It is a change of plan for us because we had planned to integrate the Mercedes power unit into the new car for the 2021 regulations. For sure, there will be restrictions in terms of how we can integrate this power unit into the current car. We have agreed together with the FIA that they will monitor very closely that we are only allowed to do the changes that are absolutely necessary to install the Mercedes power unit. They will monitor closely that we don't touch any other areas in the surroundings of the power unit, which will give us additional performance gains. We support this freezing that is happening at the moment because that ensures maximum cost saving for everyone for this year. So the FIA will be keeping an eye on how McLaren go about integrating their Mercedes power unit for next year, but I think it's safe to say that there will be a lot of eyes on McLaren in 2021, wondering if the return of the McLaren-Mercedes partnership will help the Woking team make further strides towards the sharp end of the grid. Could we even see a return of the glory days? The thing is, even with Mercedes power, it will be a tall order for them to overhaul the top three teams, but McLaren have got the resources to do it, so absolutely never say never. Right then, time for some good news, and by good news I mean some lighter stories from the world of Formula 1, and first up, and at time of recording, which for the record is Friday evening, 6 current F1 drivers have signed up for the virtual Chinese Grand Prix that is due to take place on Sunday. So far, Charles Leclerc, Alex Albon, Lando Norris, Antonio Giovinazzi, George Russell and Nicholas Latifi have signed up for the virtual race and will race alongside other entrants including Callum Ilott, Juan Manuel Correa, which is great to see, and also Real Madrid goalkeeper Thibaut Courtois. Never thought those words would leave my mouth on an F1 video, but anyway. And actually make that 7 current F1 drivers because Carlos Sainz has now been confirmed. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will pop a list on screen somewhere now of all the F1 drivers that are confirmed for this race on Sunday, because I've got a feeling it's probably going to have changed quite a bit between recording this audio and putting the video together. So the list is on screen now. If you are interested, I know not everybody is, but if you are, you can catch the virtual Chinese Grand Prix across F1's official social media channels this Sunday, with qualifying starting at 6 PM UK time. And I believe, in fact, let me check. Yep, that is the case. Sky Sports F1 will also be broadcasting it live on their channel. Next up, Daniel Ricciardo has named 5 of the drivers that he raced against in F1 who he believes are underrated, and those 5 drivers are Marcus Ericsson, who the Aussie described as properly quick when the two of them were coming through the ranks, Antonio Liuzzi, who caught Danny Ric, quote, off guard with his raw speed, Roberto Merri, who the Aussie says reminds him of Max Verstappen in how he could just rag the car and had fantastic car control. And he also picked Jenson Button, who beat Lewis Hamilton in his words fair and square on real tracks in 2011, and went on to give honourable mentions to Robert Kubica and Paul di Resta. Also on his list of underrated drivers was Jules Bianchi, but the Aussie said that it wasn't like Jules was underrated, but we never got to see him in a top car, so maybe people didn't appreciate how good he was going to be. Ricciardo also added that he believes Charles Leclerc is doing now what Jules would have been doing in that Ferrari. I've had my say on Bianchi plenty of times, but he was certainly a talent with a hell of a lot of potential. And you know what? I will always remember his drive at Monaco, as I'm sure many of you will too. Fantastic drive. But anyway, this is supposed to be the lighter side of the news. So let's open this one up to you guys. Do you agree with Ricciardo's list is essentially the question. But if not, who are the 5 F1 drivers you think are or have been underrated? You can let me know your picks in the comment section down below. And finally, Sebastian Vettel has revealed how he has been spending his time away from the track and, as well as parenting duties and getting himself a racing sim rig, he has also picked up a new hobby, or at least a new skill, and that is baking. In a video interview, Vettel said that he is spending a lot of time training, but is also having to balance that and work with looking after the kids, something I'm sure many parents can relate to. But he also said, I've had some time to bake some bread, so that's new. It's edible. Obviously, the bakeries are closed, so I had to figure something out, and I was quite surprised. So maybe it's something I will keep for later. It is only April, and I'm already covering a story about an F1 driver baking bread. Help me, for God's sake. Anyway, that is it for this video. Don't forget you can let me know your 5 underrated drivers down in the comment section, and indeed any of your thoughts on the stories featured today. Now, I will be back soon with more content as ever, but in the meantime, don't forget that you can of course follow me over on social media, and all of the links you need for that are in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching, and I will catch you again in the next one. Bye-bye.